And hello, everybody who is joining us today in our today's special HubSpot user group. Special because we are in English, and second, and of course, most important, we have a guest from the USA. You not only traveled for us to Cologne, to Germany, but Steve, very, very happy. I'm very happy to have you around here to see you and hear you and have you in our office, little office for the whole day. And do a couple of nice things with you, exchanging thoughts. But first things first, we're having our HubSpot user group today. So yeah, nice to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here and share this with y'all. Fun.
Perfect, perfect. Then I would give you the right to share your screen so you can show us your magic, what you prepared. And as I said before, if you have any questions, please let me know. We will record this session. We are recording this session. And yeah, Steve, here you go.
Perfect. Let me check share. There we go. Yeah. And then let's go full screen. Oh, I always click the wrong button. You know, you figured doing the slideshow would be the big important button,
It's
but
the
it's
same for
not.
me, especially when you're in a jet lag. That's the meanest thing any presentation and Google presentation can do.
Everything came through good on the screen share?
Perfect.
Perfect. All right, thank you. I'll get started. Hey everyone, super happy to be here and share this introduction to HubSpot development with y'all. I'll be looking at things like, what are the different options for HubSpot, doing HubSpot integrations, some that require coding skills, some that require less coding skills, so looking at the whole thing. I'm Steve Bussey. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Supered. We help people learn to use software. So we're a SaaS platform. We hook into HubSpot and help enhance the UI to do training and guidance and really pushing adoption for users. Hosted by Made to Grow. Thank you for having me, Sebastian. So I'm here in your office. It's very nice. So you want to build a HubSpot app. And then you look and you see, all right, you have HubL, you have REST APIs, you have GraphQL, you have private apps, you have public apps, you have Zapier. Do I use Zapier? Do I use something else? You have custom coded actions, you have UI extensions, you have workflow extensions, you have webhooks. I just 5 minutes ago learned that there's a new one that just released in September called CRM embeds. Like you have all these different options for what to do. And that leaves you feeling a little bit confused at what's going on, especially if you're not a developer, and just looking at all of these different terms is very overwhelming. And it's what we're going to go through and demystify all of these different things a little bit, give you the high level of them, and then we'll look at a few different ones that I think are really interesting and see what that actually looks like when we're doing a real application. So I'm going to go through all those different things I listed there and basically explain what they're used for and then give a little bit of info about them. So HubL is the first one. If you've ever done a HubSpot website build out using the CMS Hub and you had to do any type of custom development or making a custom website template, then you've probably used HubL. Basically, it gives you a set of functions for building out these custom web pages, building out modules, what have you. This is very useful for building out like websites, but in terms of enhancing the actual like experience of the CRM, you wouldn't use this for that. So this is a different use case. Then we start getting into some of the concepts that are used to actually interact with HubSpot's data and start to enhance the CRM. So the first and the most common that you might see if you're doing this is called the REST API. And basically, if you're doing any type of integration where you're going to be creating or updating data in HubSpot, you're probably going to be using this API. And so you basically use this in conjunction with some of the other tools in order to actually build your integration. And I would say the vast majority, by that, I mean like maybe 100% are going to be using the REST API. Now that's in comparison to maybe not 100, maybe 99.9%. That's in comparison to the GraphQL API. And this is also used for creating and updating HubSpot data. But the big difference here is that this is an enterprise-only feature. I know that HubSpot has talked about making this more available and having it on maybe a professional plan, which is pretty accessible. But this is one that's difficult because if you use this for app development, then you're going to be building features that are only usable by those enterprise customers. So you don't actually have this like the same way as the REST API. And this is a different way of using an API. I think it's a more modern approach. I actually would prefer to use an API like a GraphQL API. And so I'm looking forward to the day when it's just as available as the REST API is. But today it is still enterprise only. Then we start getting into the different ways that you can distribute a application. And this is important as you actually start to build it because you have to pick sort of the right foundation to build from. So the first is called a private app. And this gives you HubSpot API access for a single account. And this is very similar to the next thing we'll talk about, which is a public app. However, it has some reduced features. At the same time, even though it has reduced features, it's much easier to get started with. And so for people that are maybe building a single API or a single application for a single customer, this is very useful. This also has access to what's called serverless features, which basically allow you to run code, but HubSpot runs all the code for you. So you don't have servers, you don't think about any of that. You just give it some code to run and it runs it for you, which you cannot do with public apps. Public apps, these are used for HubSpot API access for any account. What this means is when you build a public app and you want to, start using the API, you have to go through an additional process in order to be able to do that. I didn't put the name of it here, but it's called OAuth. And basically, OAuth is used in order to give API access in a secure way. So this is more full-featured when you compare to the private app, but it doesn't have the serverless functions, but it does actually have access to more API features. And this is more difficult to use and get started with. I think if you did not know how to code, you could get started with a private app and you could figure out how to do it within an hour or so, right? It's like something you could figure out how to do. I think a public app is a little bit more difficult. And I don't know that if you didn't know how to code at all, that it would be very easy to use one of them. Now that takes us to the third option, which is sort of a not HubSpot option, which is if you wanted to use something like Zapier or Integromat to run all the application for you. This is called a integration provider as a service, or iPaaS. And you can use this if you want to have the HubSpot API access with no or very low code. So basically these platforms like Zapier, they have all the integration built, and then they have a way for you to configure it and integrate it with other systems. And you can do that in a very low code option. I call this a second order integration because you're not actually working with the HubSpot API directly. You're working with something that works with the HubSpot API directly. And so that's just an important difference where maybe it's easier to get started with, but you have less features because if they haven't built something in a very specific way, you won't have access to it. But a lot of people use this for building out integrations, and this is totally a valid way of doing it. So looking at a few of the different ways then that we can actually integrate into HubSpot's system, into their platform. So the first one, which is pretty interesting, is called custom coded actions. And you can use these to run code in a workflow. So basically, as a step of a workflow happens, you can trigger a block of code to run, and that block of code will allow you to do whatever you want to do. You could change things in HubSpot. You could do an integration to a third party, and this is all fully hosted by HubSpot. So what that means is if you write a custom coded action, HubSpot will actually run your code. You don't have to have a server to run your code, which is obviously, if you don't know how to make a server and how to get everything started, that's pretty appealing. I think this is like a operation hub feature, I think is the name of it. So it's not just like included by default, but this is sort of an add-on that a lot of people use to do these no code solutions. And with workflows now, you can do some pretty crazy stuff. I'll show you some things later that you can do with workflows. And so this is actually even more powerful now than it was 6 months ago, because there's just more workflow features. This is the new one that everyone might have heard about, which is called UI extensions. You might have seen it as a React component. And this is used for making CRM cards, middle panels, or the sidebar. This is used for basically adding things to the actual interface of HubSpot. There's also different things like custom timeline events that you can do for public apps. This is, again, one of those features where public apps have access to something, timeline events, that a private app wouldn't be able to do. And this is, I say the large rewrite. Basically, they used to have UI extensions called CRM cards and other things. They basically have a new way of doing it that's in beta that I'll show you what that looks like later. And it's extremely powerful. I used it yesterday to build a little demo for this, and I was pretty blown away by what you could do with it. And so we're going to look at this specifically in a little bit. This is very cool. Workflow extensions are sort of like custom coded actions, but they're useful when you have an application that you want other people to use. So custom coded actions are tied to a single account, and workflow extensions are able to be used by anyone, including people that don't have Operations Hub. And this is actually, we'll look at a little bit of this, but this is what we use for one of the apps that I built in order to integrate and provide its feature. There's two different types of webhooks. These are the last things we'll cover. So the first is taking data out of HubSpot. So whenever HubSpot data changes and you want to tell some other application about it, you use these webhooks, and they're pretty immediate. I'd say like within 10 seconds, you'll have the webhook provided to the other side. So you can actually use these to power like flows of, let's say you had like a website integration and you're having forms connected and all that. You can actually use these webhooks to sort of power some of that flow. On the other side, you have webhooks into HubSpot. This isn't new. It was about a year. It's about a year old. But I think with all the changes to workflows, it's starting to become popular in the last few months. Basically, you can kick off a workflow. You can start the workflow from an external system. And this is super powerful. We'll look at this one as well, because I think it's very interesting. For people that don't know how to code, this might be one option for how you can start building and sort of figuring out a solution that doesn't involve custom code. These are very cool. So here's some of the different things. We just walked through, we walked through all of these. Let's go back and just look at this list now. All right, so at least we know what these things mean. But then what are some of the different things we actually need to think about as we're picking one of these? So the first is when we're looking at the public versus the private app. And so the big question is, do you want other people to use your app? So let's say with Supered, we built an application that we want other companies to use. Our decision is made. We have to use public apps. There is no alternative where we don't use that. But another company might be building something that maybe one day other people will use, but they just want it for themselves. Maybe a private app actually makes more sense. And another thing you have to think about with this is, are you okay with running the code yourself with the public app? you will be running code yourself. But in a private app, there are these serverless functions that lets HubSpot run the code for you. So public apps are maybe more meant for like app companies that have developers on staff that can use them. And then you also have to have an understanding of the security trade-off being made, because a private app is pretty secure because it's only for one company. There's not really like a mistake that could happen. But in a public app, you could have, hundreds of companies connected to the same public app, and your code has to be correct to not leak data or something like that. Like that could happen if you didn't build your public app correctly. So it's important to be considerate of that. Then you have decision of like code or no code. So if you do not have the ability to code, the iPass, the Zapier Integromat can go a long way. Like I've seen people do some crazy stuff with this. The trade-off is it can be a little expensive. So, you could, if you're doing something really crazy with these no-code solutions, you might have a bill that's, hundreds of dollars a month or even thousands of dollars a month because of all the integration that's being done. The other question is if you care who owns the code. This is extremely important for like partners and service companies, because if your customer expects to actually own the deliverable, as in they have the intellectual property rights or they actually have it in their account, then things like custom code actions are very useful for that, because that is how custom code actions work, and the client retains the code forever. But if you actually more prefer it to be something that you own the code to, like an integration like Supered, like we own the integration and that's our intellectual property. An external public app is what we use. And then the question is if you're looking to deeply integrate or not. What I mean by that is, do you mean to change the actual experience of HubSpot? If so, the workflow extensions, the UI extensions are very, very powerful. So let's look at an actual real world app here. And so I'm going to give this example of Task Maestro. So what is Task Maestro? Let me just like give you a demo of it first. This is a totally free app that I built mainly out of love for HubSpot admins. There's no real benefit for Supered other than we give it to people for free. So in Task Maestro, the problem that it's solving is when a record owner, contact, company, or deal, when that owner changes, usually you want the tasks to also change. Because if the task owner is still owned by the old user and they're not working that account anymore, or they were like let go, something like that, you want them to have the tasks be done, and so you want to update that task owner. And basically what Task Maestro does is it allows you to update all the tasks owners whenever the owner of that record changes. And it uses the workflow actions in order to do that. So what this looks like is you set up a workflow, and you can do this on any tier of HubSpot. It doesn't have to be like enterprise or professional. And basically you say, all right, when the property value has changed, the contact owner, then we're going to run this workflow. And there's no code or anything yet. And then basically you have this custom action that is powered by Task Maestro that says we're going to reassign the task ownership. And when this workflow runs, a request is made to Task Maestro. It runs code using the REST API, using a public app, and it returns back information to this workflow that says, did you succeed or did you not succeed? And it's basically going to retry a lot. If it doesn't succeed, it'll retry a few times for a couple of days. And then eventually, you can do something like send yourself an email saying that the workflow hard failed or it succeeded and everything's good. So what this looks like from a user experience is they set up their workflow and then they go to a record. Like we'll use this one, I think. Check. Yep. And then we'll change the owner. So currently the tasks are distributed this way. There's some users that have different tasks. We just ran this code. It takes, a minute. Maybe by the time I finish the sentence, it'll be done, or maybe it won't be. We'll see. But all of these tasks are now owned by the new user. So from the user's experience, all I did was change this field. I'll change it back. And then behind the scenes, magically, this change is happening. And refresh one more time. Hopefully everything went through. There we go. Everything's back. So with this experience, we're actually sort of adding an actual CRM feature to HubSpot through this workflow. It's not a marketing feature or something like that. It's an actual CRM feature that we've extended. And just look real quick at this. We're using a public app, we're using the REST API, and we're using a workflow extension. I'll show the UI extension here in a second. But this is like a lot of code goes into this experience. So this is something that building that would be maybe difficult if you didn't have the ability to code. However, one thing we could do, like just go back to this workflow to give a real example. If you knew how to code, but you didn't know how to make an app, because those are different things, we could hit this plus button and hit a custom code. And this is what we call the custom code action, where you have the decision between two different programming languages, Node.js or Python. And basically, you can use the HubSpot API in this to actually do things with the data in HubSpot and update it. Taskmeister has fairly complicated logic, so you could build that into this, but it would be a little bit difficult to do so. But that's just an example of if you didn't actually have the ability to make an app, you could use this custom code action. So the next feature that you sort of saw a little preview of, but we'll go into detail here, is the UI extension. And these are just extremely powerful bits of code that can add entire new features to HubSpot's user interface. These are very cool. They're very new. So there's still some like learning pains, I would say, as like, learning something that's a month old and figuring out how it all works. And so we have these 4 different hook points here. So we could write some code that goes into the middle panel, which is, I'll just show these things visually as well. Right, so I was just looking at adding this, I don't even have the feature here, but it's all right. I was gonna look and see about putting it in the right-hand sidebar, but I don't have it set up that way. It doesn't really matter. So this sidebar is another place you can hook in. You can also hook into the preview pane, which is sort of like the sidebar, but maybe a little different. And then you can also hook into the help desk sidebar. So these are a few different places you can hook in. And I think the big one is on the CRM record, like being able to hook in here and here is very, very powerful. And there's over 30 different like UI components that you can use. And so basically you have all the different things you need to actually build like an app, like not just a feature, but like, I mean, pretty complex user interfaces you can build with all these different features. And basically their goal is to make it easy and look like HubSpot is sort of their goal. And they even have things that are crazy, like, putting in things that are actually native to HubSpot, like this property list. Everyone's familiar with the property list, just sort of like this bit here, but you can actually add that in and they already have a component built to do that. And so they have these like different levels of components where there's like built-in things that give you, benefit, or you can build something totally from scratch. And this is a pretty good developer experience. These are React based, which if you're not a developer, React is a web, I'd call it a user interface framework that allows you to write very rich experience user interfaces in a much easier way than we used to do it in the past. These also have TypeScript support. Again, if you're not a developer, normally you're probably heard of JavaScript, which is how you can, basically all code that runs in your internet browser is JavaScript. And TypeScript is like it basically gives you some benefits over JavaScript that make it easier to work with code using TypeScript. So for developers, this is like generally a good thing. They also have something called app projects, which basically are a new way of building an application on HubSpot. And I think they're very, very new. I just used them for myself recently, and they're very powerful, but they start to capture more of the development life cycle. Like if you have a code change, they're going to pick that up and build the code change for you. They're starting to build features like that. They have a lot of code examples, which is obviously very good if you're trying to build a feature. Having those examples means you can see something. And then they also have these baked in data components like reports and stuff like that that you can pull in for, very easily. There's a few pain points with them. You have to be like, I would say, a pretty decent developer to use them. I don't think that if you are like a no code developer that you could really build with them right now. I think building rich or complex features is always going to be hard, just from the fact of like the code has to be written, and this, you have to write code for this. There's an upfront cost to figuring out how they work. So while the developer experience, there's a lot of good things here. Initially, you have to figure out how to use them, and that can be a little difficult. And they're also heavily file-based. And what do I mean by that is you actually have to have the code on your computer locally, and you have to push it up to HubSpot's cloud. That's not how their other integration works. So this is sort of a departure from the other ways that they do integrations, but the benefit is extremely powerful. So let's look at an example of this UI extension, and we'll actually look at some of the code here, not just examples of it. So we already saw this, but this is a little widget that I built for Task Maestro. And let me set it up with some more data here. I'm going to assign these to other people manually. So basically what is happening here is this is a panel that has been submitted to HubSpot to run in the interface. And whenever this code runs, it's given information about where it is on the page. So it's, hey, we're on a contact record with the ID 151. We're on this portal for this user. Give me what you want us to do with it. And from there, this particular integration is gathering all of the in-progress tasks and then counting for each user, how many in-progress tasks do they have? And then also something that we can do here is we can click on, let's say, this user, and we can say, let's select. And so we're actually doing a data change where I can click assign tasks. And then it's going to assign the task for that user to the other user. So I basically I've added a feature to HubSpot. This does not exist, this way of working with tasks. And I'm able to actually add this feature to HubSpot CRM. It's not just a integration with a third party. It's actually extending the CRM. So you could imagine if you have, your own company or clients that have very specific processes they want to be followed, you could build custom UI extensions to solve those problems for them. So looking at the code for this, because I think that's interesting. Basically, this starts to get into the bits that are a little bit tricky about this development. So we basically have an existing application called Task Maestro, and this has all of the integration that's powering the workflow actions. But then we have these very specific HubSpot extensions, and HubSpot provides an actual helper that we use in order to build these extensions and make it easy. I'll show an example of this helper. So one of the things you have to do is you have to upload the code to HubSpot whenever you make a change. So let's make a change to this. Let's go to This is called a React component. And basically, you can sort of read it from the top down. And the way that it works is this code will run whenever HubSpot puts it into the user interface. And so we can do things like load the task data, and we can handle what happens if it fails to load. We can load all the owners that are needed for this dropdown here. We have to do this ourselves. We have to actually make these requests ourselves. They're not free. And then we effectively have the user interface defined below. So we can say things like, if there are task counts, we're going to put a table here. And these are all the rows of the table. And the final result of all this code is that you have something that looks like this. And you can even write, fairly, I'll call them rich experiences where it's not just like checking a box, but we can do things like when both boxes are checked, this top box becomes checked, right? Like things can happen as I actually interact with this user interface. And we have to write the code to do all that, but those are things that we can do. And we can do things like update the task data. So this is what happens whenever this code runs. So we have this ability to do pretty much anything we want to here. Now, one thing I'll do just as an example here is let's go ahead and let's add a heading to this and actually make some small change. So I'm going to go ahead and I use a component called the heading component. And I'll just say, I probably wouldn't use this in the real world because there's a pending task, but I'll say in progress task counts. So I've just saved this code and I go and reload and nothing happens. It's not going to be any different because I just edited some code, but I haven't actually given the code to HubSpot. So they have a helper called the HS project upload. And when I run this code or run this helper, it's going to actually submit the code to HubSpot. It'll verify that not everything is correct, but that things aren't broken, which are two different levels of correctness. And it will deploy it, and that just happened. So that just happened. I hit reload, and that code change will be live now. So this is just a different way of writing an extension that I actually really like it. I think it's very cool that we can do this. Let's go ahead and ship that back the way it was. And I think this would be a hard code to write if you didn't know how to code. Like there's a lot of, this whole code is 216 lines. And then there's a backend that has to actually power the API calls. So then there's backend code that's actually running as well that's using the REST APIs. So maybe all in all, this whole experience here is, 500 lines of code or more. And that's fairly significant. But you can do really cool things with it. So I'll try to go quick through these next examples, just to make sure we're good on time. So webhook triggers, I think these are, and some of these other ones I don't really need to show, but these ones I do want to show. Basically, these are lightweight ways to kick off workflows from outside of HubSpot. So imagine you have a web form that when you submit it, you want a workflow to run. And now you could set it up through a HubSpot form as well, and it will integrate all that for you. But let's say you weren't able to use a HubSpot form for it for whatever reason, you'd be able to integrate with this feature and have it work pretty easily. These can be used without knowing how to code. So just to visualize how simple that is, we can go to a workflow. We set up a trigger. We choose webhook trigger. And I already have example one, but let's create a new webhook trigger. So basically I say example for hug. And so it's going to give me a URL, and it's basically saying, hey, send a request to this URL. So there's a little bit of like, a little bit of development that's going on here, but something that could be done through the actual application itself. I'm going to send this event saying the location and an email address. So I sent this location. It received the event. It says, here's this. Is everything good? How do you want to map this? An email is a text. Location is a text. And then you have to choose which HubSpot property do you want to sync with. So we're going to say email. So we have to give it something so that it knows who is this contact based on what you just submitted. And that is it. So With this now, we could actually do something in this. Like I will say, update property. Actually, I'm not going to do it here because I already have one made. So let's go to the other one because it'll just be a little bit easier. I can do things like setting the city to the location that I submitted. And then I can do things like add it to a list. So I already have some that are in this list. Let's go ahead and remove them. And I'll basically send this. Matt's originally from Jackson, so let's send this event. So I've just submitted a webhook trigger with this information inside of it. The workflow code has been run by HubSpot. It's probably done or close to being done. Sometimes it takes a second to update the list. There we go. We have Matt in the list and his city has been updated to Jackson. It was Atlanta before. So we just basically did that. And there's obviously like, something that is submitting this webhook trigger, but let's say that that was all handled, by the, some other company that's providing that value. You're able to actually integrate with it without making code. I didn't have to write any code for this. I'm not going to look at custom coded actions. I think I showed you a little bit of this, but basically these are self-contained programs that run inside of a workflow step. These can be as complex or as simple as you want them to be. You could have hundreds of lines of code in one of these custom coded actions. You could have 3 lines of code. So you can have different levels of complexity. And these are, I think, especially useful for like agencies that are doing integration work. A few of the REST API tips here as we wrap up is one of the things that's really cool about HubSpot's APIs, you can actually map the schema. And so what does this mean is they have API endpoints that tell you what the data structure of HubSpot is. And this is very important if you have custom objects or custom properties. You can pull all of that out using the API. And so an example of this for Supered, we have a very specific HubSpot integrated feature that whenever HubSpot adds a new object, like lead object, I can add one line of code and fully support that lead object in my system, because that's how the integration has been written. So it maps the schema automatically. All the endpoints are consistent with each other. It just works. And that's very cool and exciting to me because I don't have to write a bunch of code. Learning the complex lookups. There's 3 different types of lookups that if you're writing a custom integration, especially like Task Maestro, has to find all the tasks, has to find all of the associations of the tasks, has to update all of those tasks. There's actually different ways of doing that that are different levels of complexity. So we have lists, which don't allow us to do any filtering. We have batch reading, which are just taking IDs and getting properties of those IDs in bulk. And then there's searching, which is actually like very complex filtering logic, which is very limited though, because you can only have like 3 filters or there's a very specific rate limit on it. But this like search is the most powerful, but also the most complicated to use. List is the easiest, but has the least features. So there's different levels. Keeping your scope in check. Basically, this just means respect your users. If you're building an integration and you don't need to access, say, deal record data, don't request deal record data, because then people have to give you access to their data that you don't actually need. HubSpot, if you ever do a certified app, they check this stuff for you to make sure that you're not incorrectly requesting data. So how can you get started with all this? This is the final slides, I promise. First is creating a developer account. We'll have this link in chat, but basically there's a video here that walks through how to create a developer account. And basically, if you're building a custom app, you need to have, I think Sebastian might have put the link in. Yep, thank you. You need to have a developer account. And then also developer accounts give you the ability to have unlimited test accounts. So it's very useful for testing without being on your real account. You have to decide how you want to integrate. We have all these different options, but at some point you have to make the choice and pick how you're going to build your integration. You have to work through that with the HubSpot documentation. They actually have very good, thorough documentation, but you also have community help, or you have partners that do this for their professional service work to build up that MVP or that integration for whatever it is. You have to become the HubSpot Dev Pro. That actually just sort of happens as you're doing all this. You learn and you figure out how to make your integration work. And if you have a public app, you can actually put it in the marketplace so other people can use it, which is very exciting. So that is wrap for me. I'm game. Sebastian, I'll hand it over to you if there's any like questions we want to do or however you'd like to handle it. Oh, I do not hear you through Zoom.
Do you hear me better? Yeah. Okay. Cool.
There we go.
Yeah, the internet connection also disconnected my headphones, but that should work now. Alrighty. Thank you very much, Steve. I think it was a perfect presentation, perfect quick start for us, for the audience. If there's anybody who has a question, please let me know. Otherwise, I do have two questions for you, Steve, and really interested on your perspective on it. The first one is from a customer perspective, what is your advice in terms of quality assurance maintenance for a private app? Because I think these are kind of questions which are also really interesting and important, how to manage, how to maintain an app, a private app.
Yeah. So the first thing that I would say here is always keep your code in some sort of code repository. So when you're writing code for like, professional development, you keep your code in a repository that tracks changes to the code, and other people are working on the code. You can see their changes. Let's say we're doing a custom coded action. I could just go in and update the custom coded action, but there is no quality control there, right? It could break it. It could fail. No other person's reviewing it. And so I think it's very important to, even if you don't have to use these code repositories, using them to force you to have a record of the changes. The second one is using the test accounts that the developer account gives you. So what we don't want to do is just make a change and then cross our fingers and hope it works and ship it into our account, and we break our client's account. And so using those test accounts is very important so that we can actually do the QA task outside of production. Those are the two biggest things I would think about.
Thank you very much. Another one is, as usual, what do you think, where is HubSpot development heading? Do you see any trends, anything where you would say, okay, this is something I would concentrate on or keep an eye on?
I think it's definitely the idea of extending the CRM. I think they've put a lot of investment and time and money into the UI extensions. It's a framework, which means they can put it in other places. And I expect that they will put more resources towards that over time. I think it's very cool as it is. Like, it's very, very powerful. And I think they're just going to work more on that. And I think, something that they've said they intend to do is adding more API endpoints. So extending the REST API with more features so that people can do more things with it. And I think, there's a lot of difficulty in getting those things across the line, but I think they're making momentum towards them all the time.
Alrighty. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's also really, really interesting because especially with webhooks, UI extensions, as you said, extending the functionalities of your CRM, making things easier for the team. I mean, we all know that HubSpot is very, very intuitive, and you can do very, very much on your own, even with no or low code skills. But yeah, as we all know, HubSpot is growing every day, every second, almost, I would say. And it makes it more complex sometimes, obviously, especially if you have other tools you want to connect it to. Yeah.
An example, I just want to share this. I know it's like a little long time, but an example of this is as I was building this presentation, I was reading the docs, obviously getting examples and stuff. And then I see this document. Basically, this isn't the document, but this is what I've seen since then, September 18th. So we're about a month ago, probably at inbound. I did not see this announced. Opening up the HubSpot CRM embed, now available. And basically what this is this is it, but we could basically put this inside of, let's say, Supered. I could embed this experience in, and I can actually say, all right, for this, like, let's go to an object. So I can say, all right, for this object, this portal. Oh, I need to do O1. I can actually embed, let's say, all the properties, and I could actually make changes to these properties through, if I picked one that could actually be updated instead of all these ones that are not updatable. But I can actually interact and see this property through this like embedded system, right? And there's like object timelines and workflow and sequences and meetings and Copilot. And I don't think this was announced. So I just found this like doing the research for this. So I think this is just like so cool that we can see examples of them opening up this extend the CRM more. And it's literally happening sometimes without even like there's just so much stuff going on that's very easy to miss things. I just learned about this, so
yeah,
I'm excited
thank
about
you.
it.
Me too. Cool. I think if nobody else has any questions, we all know that you are via LinkedIn or email or Supered. People can reach out to you if they have any questions. As said at the beginning, we will share the presentation, the recording. As usual, many questions might arise after a good day or even more. So if people out here want to reach out to us or to Steve, we'll share your contact info, obviously. Thank you very much, Steve. I know it's really hard to have a jet lag presentation. I also did that once or twice, and I really, really thank you. A perfect presentation, especially with UI extensions, because the team and me, we also recently talked about it, what might be use cases for it. Now we know it definitely. And yeah, thank you very much, Steve.
Hi, Sebastian.
Thank you.
This is Russell from HubSpot. I just wanted to come off of mute very quickly to thank Steve and you for organizing this. We're very excited about the UI extensions. And I think Steve did both a great job of summarizing it and also capturing how fast some of the stuff is. And if I'm not going to lie, I hadn't seen the CRM embed out either. So all three of us learned about it.
See, perfect. Thank you very much for that nice comment. Thank you very much. Take care. Yeah, that's it, I would say, for today. We will record a little podcast yesterday about user adoption gap. So stay tuned to take a look or take a ear for that too. And yeah, thank you very much again, Steve. Take care.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Sebastian. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Have a nice day, everybody.